We are pleased to welcome 4 great panelists to the One Kansai Tourism Forum that are extremely familiar with this industry in Kansai. Mr. Takahashi from United Airlines, Mr. Tsuchiya from Nippon Travel Agency, or Nihon Ryoko, Professor Mao from Kobe International University, and Mr. Yamakawa from Kansai Economic Federation, or Kansai Keizai Rengokai.
I'd like to introduce a very distinguished colleague and friend, Mr. Jiri Mestecky, who is our former vice president and also a partner at Kitahama Law Firm. So, Jiri.
It's my great pleasure to open this One Kansai Forum event, which is focusing on tourism and which has been organized as a result of the One Kansai initiative, which has been implemented by the Kansai chapter of the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. This initiative was the result of a position paper which was published in May of 2010, titled uniquely enough, the One Kansai Initiative. And it has been, to our great pleasure, very, very well received in the press and by a number of business and governmental organizations. That there is tremendous untapped potential for Kansai to be a driver of economic growth for Japan. Not just the region of Kansai, but for Japan, and we want to promote investment, trade, and tourism within the region. We think that there are three primary elements which put together make Kansai unique in all of Japan and Asia and make it a very, very attractive investment and living environment. These are its economic strength, its cultural heritage, and also the lifestyle of people who live here. And what we think is that in order to achieve its potential to attract investment, the Kansai governments and business organizations need to come up together and work on a coordinated regional strategy to identify specific policies which will enhance and promote economic activity and investment. A key element of the ACCJ Kansai, One Kansai initiative would be a specific proposal for the creation of a Kansai Promotion Board. Now, this Kansai Promotion Board is, or it would be rather, a jointly and adequately funded organization staffed by city and prefectural governments of Kansai. And what would it do? Well, it would focus on these things I talked about: investment incentives, trade opportunities, and tourism, which is, of course, the subject of tonight's presentation, or tonight's seminar, rather. Now, the importance of tourism, we believe, is that it is primarily, it's a gateway industry. It's an industry which brings people to the region and therefore can lead to investment in other industries and economic sectors. And that's why we think it is so important, and my colleague Herman Ehrlich is going to explore this further. We want to be an active contributor to the discussion. We do not pretend to have all of the answers to these issues. However, we believe that by working together with government organizations and other business organizations and having fora as we're having this evening, we think that we can work toward building an effective strategy for a stronger, more vibrant, and competitive Kansai.
Today we come together and ask the question, why tourism for Kansai? So, what does it matter for Japan? Well, because a nation, after all, needs to generate money to sustain its population growth, its economy. And so this afternoon, the panel and I will endeavor to convince you that tourism provides a viable opportunity, in particular for Kansai, which is exceptionally endowed with a myriad of cultural assets. So I've chosen for this afternoon 4 elements. The first one is economic impact, because we can talk a long time. People who are not in tourism are not necessarily convinced that this is the right way to go. And then we're going to talk about revenue sources, we're going to talk about source markets, and we're going to talk about yield. That is quite common in anything that relates to tourism, because we have perishable products. It grew from 25 million people traveling Earth to 940 million people. That's a lot of people traveling. This year it will be 1 billion according to the World Tourism Organization of the United Nations. So, Japan tourism. Here are some more important facts of tourism on the Japanese economy, and I'm not figuring out only the Kansai here. In 2009, we earned 12 billion in export earnings from tourism, 9.2% of GDP for Japan, and 9.8% of people employed in Japan that were related, direct and indirect, to tourism. Not such a bad prospect to go into this business. Tourism is definitely an integral part of our economy. Well, a bit closer to home is Singapore. 11.6 million visitors in 2009, I believe it is, 2010, going up to 15 million mark. Last year it was 13.5 million visitors. Singapore the size of Awaji, as we all know. Japan is hitting between 6 to 8 million, or between 7 to 8 million visitors. So we have something to aspire to here. The income that the country gets from these visitors. And please pay attention, the second number is China, the first number is Indonesia, but that is because, of course, Singapore is located next to Indonesia virtually. Considerable 10% of the economy was resting here on Chinese tourism. And what about Chinese people going to Europe, not coming to Asia? Well, that grew to 4.5 million, and by 2015, around 8.6 by 2020. So it's huge numbers of Chinese people leaving the country. By the way, the European economy was benefiting $2.7 billion from that. And in revenue sources, there's a second aspect, and I think this is where I'd like you to pay really good attention. And that is to look behind the obvious data. There is something that we call tourism satellite account perspective. And it is used when we evaluate economic prospects. There's the direct spending, the indirect spending, and then there is the induced spending. So the direct spending, well, thank you very much. I'm part of receiving money from direct spending, and so are many of my colleagues here in town. But, and these are the people who benefit from tourism here in the Kansai. But what about the indirect? And those are the people who supply us. Some of you supply hospitality and tourism and transportation organizations, and so you are indirectly linked. And you'll be happy to know that Suntory and Asahi are in there. And then induced spending. And that's a very interesting part, because these are the people that most unlikely realize that they're actually part of tourism. Often they come to realize that after a disaster has struck, for a longer period of time, people stay away. And in other words, less occupied rooms is less laundry, less workers in laundry factories, less spending in the community. And that's what we refer to as induced spending. And these are some of the people who get affected indirectly when tourism is affected by an event, or is affected in a positive sense when we grow the business. This country is so rich, this region is so rich. And I'm not so sure that we have actually used everything. There's an incredible infrastructure, air, rail, second to none. So where is our market? Who do we need to go and look for? Do we go for business tourism? Do we go for conventions to concentrate? And the advantage here is that few people make a decision on a lot of people. A convention of 10,000 people is decided probably by the better part of 20 or 30 people, not more. So when these people are happy, they will come back as individuals. So business tourism is not a bad option. But if we consider China as part of a solution, we must be mindful of some factors. China visitors are strongly influenced by visa requirements, of course. The emergence of a large middle class which can afford to travel abroad is important for us if we go after that market. And the strengthening of the renminbi increasingly increases the purchasing power of the Chinese people. In a matter of fact, in the last decade, the renminbi rose 20% against the US dollar. But for every 10 foreigners who come to this country, 4 people, to be precise 3.7, speak actually Chinese, be that Taiwan, Hong Kong, or of course China. So that's a considerable amount of people who come and visit us already. JTA, who you're all familiar with, and if not, it's a Japan tourism agency, advises that 20 billion yen is going to be spent on promoting inbound tourism to Japan. So I hope Kansai will benefit from that. And the focus of that will be on the mainland, for which 8 billion has been reserved in yen. China's young and affluent middle class, currently 175 million, will be 500 million people, all definitely a part eager fund to come to us. So we need to find the right quantity between volume and the spend, because we can't, the infrastructure in the Kansai doesn't allow for us to welcome half of China. Mature infrastructure, it's high quality here in the Kansai, and it is fairly costly to operate. So we need to make sure that when we go after this business, we consider volume and yield. So who will be Japan's largest customer? I think it's certainly not me who announced that. And yes, the question is, do you speak Chinese? And if you don't, my suggestion is consider learning it.
皆さんこんばんは。ユナイテッド航空の高橋でございます。
Mr. Toru Takahashi, the managing director in charge of Japan sales at United Airlines, spoke about the efficient use of the 3 airports in Kansai. In order to increase the usage and efficiency of these 3 airports, Mr. Takahashi suggested that there must be improvements in the connectivity from these airports to other parts of Japan and the world. Also, from an airline perspective, he suggested that the need for decreasing landing fees exists. He has also highlighted that despite the Kansai airport being a 24-hour airport, there is lack of access during this period of the odd hours of the evening. Mr. Takahashi also suggested there is still need to gain further commitment from those living in the Kansai region to use these airports. He mentions that it is critical to make it a point for Kansai residents to use the Kansai International Airport when flying out of Japan. Next, we had Mr. Masahiko Tsuchiya, Deputy General Manager, International Travel Division, Inbound Promotion Office of Nippon Travel Agency. He mentioned that 75% of visitors to Japan are Asian and highlighted their importance in generating an inbound visitor growth strategy in Japan. The primary reasons for these visitors traveling to Japan were tourism, and various forms of tourism were spoken of which include study, work, and others. Mr. Tsuchiya mentioned that economics or financing incentives are not the only factors that lead to increasing inbound traffic into Japan. But what we must do is create and implement an appealing promotion strategy targeting these travelers overseas that sends a clear message on what is good about Japan and portray Japan as a brand name overseas. Professor Mao of Kobe International University, an author on Chinese tourism, spoke of the necessity of how the people of the Kansai must be more creative in creating an attractive product for tourists to come to Kansai. In reference to his residence in Nishinomiya, Hyogo, Professor Mao spoke of how the contents of the literature written by the world-renowned Japanese author Haruki Murakami played an important part in invigorating tourism in his neighborhood. In one of Murakami's books, there is a part about a character fishing for shrimp in a pond at a Nishinomiya shrine. Apparently, Professor Mao himself went to the pond to see if there was any shrimp there. But his point was that this pond with shrimp in the book has become so famous now that there are busloads of tourists and fans of Murakami Haruki's literature that come to visit Nishinomiya Shrine to look at the pond. Professor Mao's point was that tourism is built from providing an opportunity to share present cultural aspects, but could also expand by sharing newly created ideas that builds on the curiosity of people that would like to visit and experience certain cultural aspects unique to that region. Finally, we had Mr. Kaoru Yamakawa, Managing Director, Kansai Economic Federation, or Kansai Keizai Rengokai, as we know as Kankeren as well. He highlighted the introduction of a newly created interpretation device that can be easily used by tourists. This simul-verbal translation device is expected to break down the communication barriers that many foreign travelers experience during their visits to Japan, and also allow human interaction between the people in Japan. He also referred to the One Kansai paper viewpoint, issued by the ACCJ Kansai in 2010, and hinting that creation of this device may have partially been influenced by the proposals set in the One Kansai position paper. Mr. Yamakawa and Kankeren have been great friends and supporters of the ACCJ Kansai, and we greatly look forward to working with them in developing ideas to support initiatives to develop Kansai and the entire economic region.